Hosea chapter 11. We don't talk about Hosea much in the church. Hosea was a righteous prophet in the northern kingdom of Israel. Hosea lived his whole life out as a lesson to Israel. In fact, married women from other countries to show that as a symbol of Israel betraying God, and the often used image in the time of Israel, in that time in Israel, was God as the bridegroom and Israel as the bride. And Hosea used his very family life as an image to show Israel their betrayal to their own God. That's the kind of righteous prophet Hosea was. And we come to chapter 11, and Hosea is deep into what we call the prophetic imagination. He is dreaming and imagining God's relationship for us and trying to teach Israel new things. Verses 1 to 4 of chapter 11 speaks of the tender care a father has shared with a son. Far more tender than the conventional father-son relationships of their time. In a patriarchal society, sons were about duty and they were about legacy. They weren't about mushy hugging and loving and picking the son up when the son is hurt or anything like that. Men just didn't act like that back in 722 BCE. So this is a rare imagining from Hosea of a father-son relationship with tenderness. And in fact, it could have been, you could switch in mother-daughter for this, absolutely. It isn't key to the text. It's just father and son was the part, that's the patriarchal system of the day. So father and son was the relationship that Hosea used to draw out the people's imagination. This beautiful, beautiful image. God says through Hosea, in Hosea's imagination, "Yet it was I who taught Ephraim to walk." Ephraim is Israel. "I took them up in my arms, but they did not know that I healed them. I led them with cords of human kindness, with bands of love. I was to them like those who lift infants to their cheeks. I bent down to them and fed them." I love this image of caring and fathering and parenting that is so tender. It actually reminded me of my dad when we went tobogganing. We'd go tobogganing, and I often took the spray of the snow at the front of the toboggan. I don't know why, but it was me. Because, the shorter, so my little sister Erin would be in the front, or not. Maybe she was too young. Then I'd be there, and then my brother would be there, and you put your legs around each other on a long toboggan, and then my dad would be on the back. And we'd just whip down Devil's Hill in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, at the Brightwood Golf Course, and the spray of the snow from the front of the toboggan, and it stung. You remember that feeling of stinging on your face of snow? And all I remember is my dad's big warm hand. And he'd pull his mitt off. He had these big, beautiful leather mitts. Take them off. And I could just, you're there and you're crying, and this big warm hand wiping the sting off of my face and drying my face. That's the kind of love expressed in the beginning of Hosea 11. But then in verse 5, like a teenager, Israel rebels against God again. "They shall return to the land of Egypt, and Assyria shall be their king, because they have refused to return to me." Hosea is speaking of the very real situation at that time where Israel made military alliances, which we're thinking about this weekend, military alliances with Assyria, and they made it a military alliance even with Egypt, that God had spent so much love and strength bringing them out of slavery from Egypt. Hundreds of years later, they're right back into it, aligning themselves with the Egyptians. By verse 7, we can hear the exhaustion of a father with a teenager who presses every button and will not listen to reason. You ever have one of those? You ever have a teenager that presses every button because they're so much like you? Your shadow side, walking and talking. There have never been those kind of teenagers in this church, but they do exist. They press every button and they will not listen to reason. Teenagers do not want to hear about logic. The father says in this passage, basically, "I'm done. I will not help Israel when it calls to me." But verse 8, the tone changes utterly. Utterly, the tone changes. It is a divine soliloquy, an aside made, a speech made to an aside, as if on stage. An internal pondering, a wrestling where God is speaking to God's self. It may seem rare and unusual for us to hear the speech where God is wrestling with God's self. Because in modern popular religion, our belief has so often been that God has no unresolved, conflicted interior life. We don't imagine a God who wrestles with decision-making, or with what to do now, or what did I do wrong that I could do better. We think of God immortal, like unchangeable, eternal, forever the same, all that kind of stuff. That's not the God that Hosea imagines. There is a God here who pauses, who stops for self-reflection. In this passage, God seems to be saying, hold up. What are you doing? Can you hear what you just said? And we enter into these four passionate how can I's. After saying, I will not listen when they call, God turns internally and says, how can I give you up, Ephraim? How can I hand you over, O Israel? How can I make you like Admah, that's Sodom? And how can I treat you like Zeboim, that's Gomorrah? How can I? Can you hear the pain? God says, my heart recoils within me. My compassion grows warm and tender. This internal probing, these questions of remembering bring God back to being more than just an accuser and judge in a courtroom drama. So what if the evidence is in against Israel? So what if Israel has wronged God? God will turn once again toward Israel. I will not execute my fierce anger. I will not destroy again Ephraim. Let's pause here for a moment. It's a metaphor, a parenting metaphor, used deeply by Hosea and his prophetic imagination. And metaphors about parenting and God allow us to glimpse a bit of the pathos of the relationship. We can understand the frustration and anger that comes with parenting a wayward child. It's a metaphor. It's not something we should get stuck on as an absolute. The metaphor, like any good metaphor, draws us close. We use human metaphors for God because being human is the most intimate thing we know. It's the closest experience we have. So we say, we serve with God's hands in the world, and that helps us feel intimate and close to that relationship. We say, God is like a parent. The Lord is my shepherd. We use images that help us feel closer to God because it's what we know closely ourselves. But every metaphor is limiting. And this one is especially because as we might understand God's anger and judgment and pain and hurt around the wayward child, it is very hard for us to truly understand the depths of love that God expresses after verse 8. In the end, the answer to God's questions can only be found in God's qualitative otherness. God says, for I am God, not man, the Holy One of Israel in your midst. And there the metaphor ends. I am God, not man. I am the Holy One in your midst. So we can use the parenting metaphor to enter into some understanding, but it has its limits all of a sudden. Any of our metaphors. We're not meant to get stuck. Is God just a father? Oh, yes, God is just a father. No. Is God only a shepherd? No. Is God a rock and just a rock? No. They help us understand, but always to a certain place, because God is so other. God's love especially is so immense. We simply cannot comprehend it. We have hardly any experience with it, or that can match it. We can easily understand God's anger. And certainly, God's anger and judgment is a famous image we cling to wrongly. that we call the Old Testament God. Anybody ever say that to you before? Oh, I believe in the New Testament God, not the Old Testament God that's angry and judging. It's a wrongful image. Listen to what Hosea has to say. But when it comes to the opposite way of God, the way of love in the face of wrongs, the love in face of unjust actions, the love that comes after the breaking of a relationship, the turning away, we find it hard to understand this much love. But on Remembrance Sunday, we must open our hearts to this dream of love. We must follow Hosea's prophetic imagining and become open to a depth of love that is hard to grasp. We cannot think God's love. It just doesn't make sense, friends. On Remembrance Sunday, we need to do this because our belief about God roots our behavior in the world. An angry, judging God who is on our side allows us to believe that violence and war are normal and helpful. Dreaming about God's love, agreeing that it is more powerful, agreeing that we don't fully understand it, will help us with our own self-reflection. Walter Brueggemann asks, after reading Hosea 11, what is it like to be made in the image of that God? What is it like? What would it mean for us to be made in the image of a God who loves that much, beyond our understanding? He continues on and suggests that in the 21st century in North American society, self-reflection, looking inward at ourselves and changing, has gone by the wayside. We're fast-paced, 10-second audio clips, sound clips, quick media. He says the self of the selfie is not self-reflective. The self of the selfie picture is not a self that is reflective about why are we here? What are we doing? What can we change? Who am I? But if we ask ourselves the important questions, like God did, how can I? If we dream of a God who loves us so deeply, then this will stop us from living out the sharp edges, the quick reactions, the moody, self-serving judgments, the petty and seemingly constant no that follows a reasoning based on rules, codes, faulty social systems, and structures. Let me say that again. If we can actually open our hearts to dreaming and imagining a God whose love is bigger than we can imagine, it'll stop us from living out the sharp edges, the polarities, the quick reactions, the moody, self-serving judgments, the petty and seemingly constant no that we use that seems to follow a reasoning based on rules, codes, faulty social systems, and structures. I truly believe we can stop all wars. Sisters and brothers, I truly believe we can stop all wars, all hatred, and all division. I wouldn't sit on this stool each Sunday if I didn't really believe it. I truly believe that we are made in the image of God's love, that we all carry this love inside of us. There is stuff in the way of us living it out. So we need to do some deep reflecting, some deep dreaming, some deep imagining, and some deep remembering, lest we forget who we are and whose we are. Amen.